In this morning's video, I'm going to point out a couple of things to look for this week. I've noted this before that during the advancing phase of an intermediate cycle, price doesn't tend to stay oversold very long before rallying again. So you can see this is GDX, the major gold miners. As it started this intermediate advance, the characteristics of the market changed. Instead of getting these deeply oversold levels that you get during the declining phase of an intermediate cycle, you get the behavior changes and price tends to rally very quickly from oversold levels. So I'm going to say we can watch this this week and see how this unfolds. If this was an intermediate top, then price will stay oversold this week, and that would be a big clue that um, an intermediate decline is underway. And that in that scenario, at some point here, we would miners would bounce, but they would not make a higher high, and then they would roll over and start down again quickly once the RSI got up here and tagged overbought. On the other hand, if we rally quickly right here and price doesn't stay oversold, then that would be an indication that the intermediate cycle is still advancing, and we would look for another leg up. And I think this will solely boil down to whether or not foreign central banks are able to prevent the dollar from continuing the move down into its intermediate cycle low. So let me switch over to that. All right, so this is UUP, so this is an ETF that more or less tracks the dollar. So this was clearly a daily cycle low. However, the dollar had started making lower lows and lower highs, so this was an indication that the intermediate decline had begun. It's only been 15 weeks from this intermediate cycle low to this intermediate cycle low. And I'll say again that there's no natural scenario where an intermediate cycle bottoms in only 15 weeks. However, central banks can and very often do intervene in the currency markets. It's one of the most heavily manipulated markets on the planet, and they are going to try and stop the dollar from continuing down into a full intermediate decline. Basically, they want to keep their currencies weak against the dollar, so they're going to try and stop this the intermediate decline in the dollar. And what should happen naturally is the dollar should top before making a higher high here, and it should roll over, make another leg down, another lower low. We should at the very minimum, we should have at least one more daily cycle that left translates and makes a lower low, and we probably should have two daily cycles. So in reality, the final intermediate cycle low probably shouldn't occur until April or May. And in that scenario, then gold should continue to rise. The intermediate advance should continue moving up for as long as it takes the dollar to find that intermediate cycle low. However, if central banks succeed in weakening their currencies against the dollar and they force this they force the intermediate cycle low to occur prematurely in the dollar, then this could turn out to be an intermediate bottom in the dollar, and it could be an intermediate top in the gold market. So moving back to that chart of GDX. So this is, I think, what you need to watch this week, and it'll tell you whether or not central banks are going to succeed in propping up the dollar and preventing the normal move down into an intermediate cycle low, which should still have another at least 2, maybe 3 more months to go before the dollar completes its bottom. Uh, Watch the miners right here. If they can rally this week and bounce quickly out of this oversold condition, that's probably a pretty good clue that would tell you that central banks are going to fail to prop up the dollar, and the daily cycle will left translate, and the dollar will continue on making lower lows and lower highs until we get a final intermediate cycle low sometime later in the spring. If, on the other hand, this stays oversold this week, and the miners fail to produce any kind of significant rally here, then that's a pretty good indication that this was an intermediate cycle top, and that central banks are going to succeed in propping the dollar up, and they may have created a premature intermediate cycle low a couple of weeks ago.